My name is Ersin. To me, anyone who listens to what I share is a person whose right to life is sacred. Their language, religion, or skin color doesn't matter. Being a good human being is enough. Hello again. In this video, I will explain how one-man regimes can last for years, yet eventually always come to an end, collapse, and leave deep, often irreparable scars on societies after dictators are gone. Drawing on my historical research, life experience, knowledge, observations, and commentary, I will walk you through the process of how a democratic republic turned into a one-man rule under the name of a presidential system. I will tell you how Turkey was forced into a straitjacket, how religion was used as an opiate to hand over the future of the boomer generation's children into the hands of one man, how Generation Z has paid the price trying to break free from this, and how they have been silenced with violence and prison sentences. This is the second episode of our video series. Now, I want to talk about someone I deeply respect, admire, and whose ideas I try to understand. He is the leader who, right after winning a defensive war, and even before the dust had settled, declared, "Peace at home, peace in the world." That leader is Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. Let's simply call him Atatürk, so it stays in mind. Atatürk was born in 1881 in Salonika, today within Greece's borders, but at that time part of the Ottoman Empire. His father died when he was still a child. He grew up in a small family of three, with his mother, whom he loved dearly, and his sister. By the age of 13, some of his teachers had already noticed his intelligence and his ability to organize others. His leadership qualities were clear, even at that age. After finishing elementary school, he enrolled in military school at the age of 13. In other words, he began his professional military career as a teenager. Why am I telling you this? Because after the War of Independence, a saying spread throughout the country that answers it perfectly. Think like Atatürk. What does that mean? It means Atatürk was a man of vision. He always looked at the positive side of events. He was open to many ideas, fed by the thoughts of others, and thus able to decide on the best course of action. He was a genius who turned impossibilities into possibilities with the people he inspired, a leader whose people embraced his principles and reforms. I want you to know and understand such a man. Even his enemies respected him and would say, such a leader comes once in a century, and this century he came to the Turks. He was never a soldier who waged a war of aggression, despite the last Ottoman Sultan and his family, who, in order to protect their throne, collaborated with the enemy and accepted a symbolic monarchy at the cost of subjecting the Turkish people to exploitation, branding him a traitor and issuing a death sentence against him. Atatürk declared independence or death and launched the War of Independence in Anatolia. He defended his homeland and, despite enormous hardships, wrote a great epic of success. War is not a single concept. We must distinguish it clearly. There are two main categories: wars of aggression and wars of defense. A war of aggression is when you set your eyes on land or resources that do not belong to you. You invade with the mindset of that should be ours and enslave the people there. This has happened throughout history. A war of defense, however, is completely different. It is like driving a thief out of your home. You are attacked, under threat, and your freedom is about to be taken away. At that point, fighting is not a choice. It is a necessity. The goal is not to gain land, but to protect what already exists. The clearest example in Turkish history is the War of Independence. The country was under occupation. The economy had collapsed. The people were exhausted. And that is exactly when leadership mattered most. This is where Atatürk's difference becomes clear. He waged not a war of aggression, but a war of independence. That is why the world respects him. Today, however, most wars are marketed as defensive wars, but in reality, they are wars of interest. Through media, propaganda, and social media manipulation, an image of "we are justified" is created. The public is drawn into wars that are not truly in their interest. The cost of a war of aggression always falls on the people. Young lives are lost, the economy collapses, and the future is stolen. And when the war is over, do those lands really belong to the people, or do they only enrich a certain group? That's another matter. This is why, when evaluating wars, we must first ask the question, is this truly a defensive war, or is it an offensive one? Now, let's return to our main subject. The War of Independence had ended. From the knowledge he had gathered over years of reading, and through his own foresight, Atatürk had already formed the idea of a republic in his mind. At that time, in a war-weary Turkey, the literacy rate was just 2%. One of the most important things he said right after the War of Defense was, "Peace at home, peace in the world." He took off his uniform, put on the suit that reflected his elegance, and by saying, "I want to teach children," he elevated the teaching profession and instilled in the youth of the Republic a desire to learn. He had now become the Republic's head teacher. The only source of livelihood left from the Ottoman Empire was agriculture. He founded the village institutes, and by employing people there, he raised the literacy rate from 2 per 1,000 to 20% in just 10 years. He sent young people abroad to study medicine, engineering, veterinary science, and industrial development, making sure they received the education necessary for the country's progress, especially prioritizing Germany. Let me illustrate his dedication to education through the words of Sadi. The year was 1923, September. The War of Independence had ended less than a month earlier, and there was still 1 month to go before the proclamation of the Republic. An announcement was made for an exam, and the notice read, "Those who pass the exam will be supported by the state to study in Europe." Sadi saw this announcement. He thought, how could this be possible? The war had just ended. There was no republic yet, no functioning state. But Atatürk was already setting up the system, and within a month, he would proclaim the Republic. Sadi went to his teachers to confirm the announcement. He took the exam and became one of the 11 young people who passed, out of 120 candidates. He was given the documents and a train ticket for Europe, but when he arrived at the train station, he hesitated and considered turning back. He feared that once in Europe, the still unestablished system might forget him, and he might end up alone in an unfamiliar country. 1 hour before the train's departure, an officer came up to him. "Are you Sadi? I've been looking for you, son. You have a telegram." When he opened it, he read these lines. "I am sending you there as sparks. I expect you to return as flames. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk." After receiving this telegram, Sadi did not hesitate for a single minute. He boarded the train and went to Europe to study. Atatürk was a remarkable leader who believed education was a mark of civilization, who knew when, where, and how to speak and act, a gentleman with sharp and penetrating eyes, and a man with the vision to ensure that a young student in a remote corner of the country would receive that telegram before the train departed in the chaos of a newly emerging nation. The Sadi we just spoke about is Ordinarius Professor Mahmud Sadi Irmak. He became a great physician, founding universities and academic chairs, and left his mark as a distinguished figure in medicine. I would also like to point out that it should be noted that in addition to his training as a staff officer and commander-in-chief, Atatürk read nearly 4,000 books throughout his life. In the memoirs of those who witnessed him on the battlefield, it is told that even during war, and especially on the night before major battles, he was reading books. He spoke 4 languages fluently and with mastery. Now, let's return. After the War of Independence, in the tired, impoverished, infrastructureless, and industrially weak Republic of Turkey, Atatürk pursued a policy of peace, both at home and abroad, with the motto, peace at home, peace in the world. Because he knew that war only profited arms dealers. The concept of a republic is built on a system where the people win. Wars, on the other hand, are monsters that destroy systems. In the young republic, the people would now receive their fair share from production. Factories were established, a national campaign for education was launched, and agriculture was modernized. Women were granted the right to vote and to be elected. In other words, Atatürk did not see defending the homeland merely as fighting. He saw it as educating and raising a skilled people and leading them toward prosperity. And he did this as someone who, while still an Ottoman officer, had fought on every front of the empire and knew firsthand the devastation of war. When the Ottoman Empire collapsed and the last sultan, Vahdettin, fled aboard a British warship, the empire owed the British approximately 85 million gold lira. Atatürk accepted to pay this debt from the Ottoman era under the Treaty of Lausanne and began the payments in 1930. This raises the question, why would a sultan, whose state was so heavily indebted, flee aboard the warship of that very creditor nation? And why would the creditor state take him aboard and whisk him away? After that departure, the last sultan was never able to return to Turkey. There are many accounts from that period regarding this matter, but I will not go into them here. As a leader who read deeply and broadly, Atatürk launched many initiatives for the nation's development. Let me share just a few. In 1926, the Floating Fair project was brought to life. The ship was loaded with agricultural products from every region of the country: hazelnuts, dried grapes, wheat, rose oil, coffee, Turkish delight, tobacco, and many more local goods. It also carried carpets made from animal wool, tiles, meerschaum used for jewelry making, decorative stones, porcelain, various artworks, and numerous other goods and foods. The ship, with a crew of 125 and a total staff of 280, was ready to set sail for Europe. Having traveled across Europe during his years as an officer in the Ottoman army, Atatürk personally inspected the ship before its departure, reviewing the arrangements for hospitality, the organization of events, and even the details of the upcoming balls and receptions. The ship even had a symphony orchestra on board. Departing from Istanbul, the ship first stopped in Algeria to take on coal. When it arrived, the public's intense curiosity led to the opening of the ship's gates. Seeing modern-dressed Turkish men and women, the local Arabs watched in astonishment. From there, the ship continued on to Barcelona, where it was greeted with great interest. 10,000 people came to visit. The next stop was France, where 25,000 people toured the ship. Then, in England, another 25,000 visitors came aboard. The British were astonished at how quickly the Turks had transformed, and their newspapers wrote about it for days. After England, the ship traveled to the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Finland. Even before the voyage, Finland had written directly to the government, requesting that the ship visit. After stops in Poland and Russia, the next destination was Denmark. There, the people welcomed the ship at the port, and when the Presidential Symphony Orchestra on board played the Danish national anthem, the crowd's excitement grew even greater. In appreciation of this gesture, Denmark's foreign minister personally hosted the exhibition staff at his home and expressed his gratitude. After Belgium, the ship set sail for Italy. The first stop was the port of Genoa, where the mayor of Genoa spoke with praise about Atatürk. This was a great source of pride for the ship's crew. The second stop in Italy was Naples, where the ship was once again visited by thousands of people, and several trade agreements were signed there. Within 3 months, the ship had docked at 12 countries and 16 ports, fostering many friendships and partnerships. Turks had found their place in the European market, and there were smiles everywhere. Most importantly, the image of the Turks had changed in a positive way. People were saying, the Turks are not barbaric or bigoted after all. Atatürk himself was also spoken of with admiration. Just 3 years earlier, nothing remained of the backward, third world Ottoman Empire that the occupying nations had known. Countries like England, France, and Italy, the very ones that had occupied the land, could not recognize a trace of the sick man they had last seen. Europeans could hardly believe their eyes, seeing the shift from veiled women in black chadors and men in shalwars and rawhide shoes to modernly dressed female hostesses and men in suits. Moreover, thanks to this floating fair, Turkey managed to achieve a 3.5% economic growth even during the Great Depression of 1929. Now let me also mention another initiative tied to Atatürk's vision of peace at home, peace in the world. In 1926, April 23rd was declared National Sovereignty and Children's Day, the first holiday in the world dedicated to children. This holiday was both a gift to the children who had lost their fathers in the war and an occasion to invite children from all over the world, through schools, to Turkey each year to join the celebrations and form friendships with Turkish children. At the same time, new generations were building bonds to ensure they would never fight again. Don't you agree? This was an important vision for peace. Please share your thoughts on this point. Now, I will conclude this section by telling you about another one of Atatürk's major development projects. Atatürk wanted to establish a textile factory in Aydın Nazilli, a region once described centuries ago by Herodotus, the father of history, as the most beautiful land under the sky. The young republic had nothing but manpower, yet manpower itself had been greatly diminished during the War of Independence just 15 years earlier, leaving a population consisting largely of women. Atatürk's decision in 1934 to grant women the right to vote and to be elected was therefore a highly strategic plan to unleash the power of women. In Europe, the right to vote and be elected was granted between 10 and 40 years later than in the Republic of Turkey. What we accept today as undeniable, gender equality, was something Atatürk had already recognized nearly a century ago and used as an opportunity for his nation's development. At that time, with the memory of the Ottoman era still fresh, doing this was nothing short of a revolution. Even today, this approach deserves great respect. Anyway, let's return to the main subject and analyze how Atatürk managed to establish the Sümerbank cotton and textile factory in Aydın Nazilli. The year was 1937. In the 15 years since the war, agriculture and livestock planning had improved the country to a certain degree, but industrialization had yet to develop. Agriculture had reached a sustainable level, and an agreement was signed with the Soviet Union of that time. The Soviets would build this massive facility with 120 engineers, providing both the construction and training. The factory would employ 2,500 workers and serve as a model development project. Inside the facility were a 700-seat cinema hall, a theater and theater club, a radio club, art studios for painting and sculpture, a sports club, the nation's first football field with undersoil heating, volleyball courts, tennis courts, a boxing ring, cycling tracks, a hospital with 40 beds, operating rooms, laboratories, and a pharmacy. The surrounding villages were provided with healthcare services and free medicine. The facility also included a primary school, a nursery, its own power plant, vocational training courses for young women, and literacy programs for people of all ages. There was even a small train to transport workers to and from the city, and housing for 264 families, accommodating about 1,000 people. It also featured a bathhouse and many other social amenities. Every 6 months, fabric, shoes, and clothing produced by the factory were distributed to the people of Nazili. It was an extraordinary social development project. Payment for the facility would be made in agricultural products such as vegetables, citrus fruits, olives, hazelnuts, cotton, and more. Most importantly, the factory would export its textile products to Europe. After Atatürk's death, similar agreements following his vision led to the Soviet Union constructing, in 1967, a steel plant, an aluminum plant, an oil refinery, a hydroelectric power plant, a sulfuric acid plant, a fiberboard plant, and a glass factory, all on a turnkey basis. This section ends here. Don't forget to subscribe to be notified of new sections, and if you enjoyed it, please hit the like button.